Welcome back. I'm here with Miss Jeanne Cyriaque. She is the African American Programs Coordinator for the Historic Preservation Division of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
You were here with us back in, I believe, November of 2007, and you identified for us a historic treasure. We knew it was important, but we really didn't know what it was. And it was a building that's owned by Pleasant Grove Baptist Church, and it's located at 2525 Old Lower River Road. And I just want you to tell our listening audience, our viewing audience, and our listening audience, how did you identify that building and why did you think it was so important?
Well, when we first went to the setting, I noticed there were three structures in close proximity, that being the Pleasant Grove Church, the Lodge School, and the cemetery. And in many rural African American communities, you might find these type of structures. Basically, I knew it immediately because I've seen many one-room schoolhouses, as well as schools that appeared a little bit later than this one, that were known as Rosenwald schools. So a lot of times I go around the state trying to find these buildings. And so when I saw the Beulah Grove Lodge School, I said, oh, this is a rarity because we don't have a lot of them that we know about anymore, at least in a rural setting.
Well, you did tell me two things. You said that it was rare, and you said that if we wanted it on the register, we needed to get started right away because the process took about 2 years.
Right.
And it did. It took about 2 years. And so now we have succeeded in placing it on the Georgia register. That was in June of this year. No, that was in February of this year, I believe. Now, what does that mean for the community?
Well, what it means for the community is for a property to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places is very significant. This is our nation's collection of buildings and historic places that are significant both to the states that they come from as well as to the history of our country. In particular, as it relates to the African American experience, the reason that I said the school lodge was rare was that there aren't too many of these buildings left. And they help to tell us more about how African Americans lived, primarily during the segregation era. It played out a little differently sometimes in a rural community because at that time this part of Douglasville was rural. Usually the community really helped to support these schools. This lodge was built around 1910. At that time, there were less than 40% of all the schools in Georgia for African Americans were public. So this means, especially in a rural community, that the community had to take charge themselves in terms of providing education for their students. So the lodges are particularly important because not only did the community build these places, but they maintained these places. And that is exactly what happened in Beulah Grove.
Now, are there any other similar lodges you can cite in the state?
Yes, there are a few. We have about 15 or 16 Masonic lodges that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places in Georgia. We're beginning to really study this and to identify other buildings, which is kind of why I recruited you guys to be listed, because I know there are a lot more out there than those 15. But one that is very similar, also in a kind of rural setting, is the Chickamauga Lodge. And it too even almost looks identical to yours, where the bottom floor was used as a schoolhouse and the top floor was reserved for Masons. In an urban setting, the Masonic Lodge might look a little different. What comes to mind immediately is the Auburn Avenue Masonic Lodge, which later became home for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. It was a brick building.
That was a beautiful
But that
building.
was kind of unusual.
Did they build that building? Would they have built that building? The Masons?
Yes, very likely.
That's a
It's a
beautiful
gorgeous
building. It is beautiful.
Got the emblem on it.
Yes, it does. It does. I just love looking at it.
But we have about 16 around the state. And but the one that most closely mirrors yours would be in Chickamauga.
It was interesting to look at it because there were some similarities not only with the building, but also with the Masonic benches that I saw inside of that structure. And that's what helped me identify the Masonic benches in our lodge school, because I didn't know what they were.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I've seen this before, so that was helpful. The narrative that we had to provide for the school also was extremely interesting, and we learned that a freed slave, Jack Smith, actually donated the land to the church and to the school to apparently build the school lodge and the church. So we assume that he was a Mason. We also assume that he is buried in that cemetery, although we haven't been able to find a grave for him. So we did find that. So it was just interesting. And then when the committee asked me to submit more information on the lodge, we learned of some of the students who attended the school, some of the teachers who taught at the school. So a lot of interesting history came out of that process of preparing that 2-year-long application. What do you think we can utilize the facility for once we get the restoration effort started?
Well, I think buildings like this, they were built for community use. So the best way to adapt them currently is also for community use. In many instances, the lodge, and I think historically even Beulah Grove might have served this purpose, where sometimes it's a fellowship hall for special events that the churches may be putting on. Or sometimes you can use it for other educational purposes, like hosting community lectures and meetings. And then the Masons can always use this top floor, as they historically have, for their private meetings. But that's the most common use.
Okay. When do you anticipate that we will have it formally listed on the National Register?
Well, we're very hopeful that it'll be in February.
Yeah. Okay.
During Black History Month. We have submitted the final nomination to the National Park Service, and it usually takes about 45 days. So we're hoping it'll be.
Days.
We're hoping it'll be right around February.
Okay. Well, that would be good. Maybe you can come back. We're going to have a ceremony,
celebration,
a ceremony, and maybe you can come back and join us for that.
I would love to.
Is there anything you would like to let the viewing audience know before we end this interview about how they can help to preserve our history?
I think it's very important, though it was a grueling process for us to nominate more of these types of properties to the National Register of Historic Places. It gives a good documentation of Black history in a rural setting at the local level. And let's face it, historically, African American history was not covered as much as the literature. So it's not just about documenting all the stuff about the building. It's bringing to life the people associated with the property.
I agree. Well, thank you for being with us
today.
Thank you, Gwen. You all stay with us. We'll be back with more.